Happy Tuesday, everybody. Hope you're all doing well. So every 2 weeks, what I like to do is the community deck tech, and this week we only had 2 submissions, so it's going to be a little bit of a shorter episode. Pardon me, someone caught my throat there. So this one's Jund Dinos because in the best of 3 sideboard we have the Cal Sellsword. This is just like a Gruul Dinos build specifically for best of 3. So this one was submitted by Ortinho, and first thing I'd like to do is, as is tradition, talk about the lands. So if you count Galta and the Skull Spore Nexus as 2, discounted fully, then I'd run this as 23 lands in best of 3, 22 in best of 1. So I think you're cheesing it a little bit if you're playing it for best of 3 because you're currently on 22. Not a huge thing, right? A single colored pip like Land of War Elves wants 14 sources. Right now you have 16, sort of. That's if you're comfortable naming Elf as the creature type for your Cavern of Souls or your Secluded Courtyard. Not the worst case scenario if you do have a turn 1 Land of War Elves, but also maybe not ideal. I'd probably run the 4th copy of the Carplusian Forest and the 4th copy of the Copperline Gorge, just so that you can get up to that without having to rely so heavily on the named lands, if you will. So the other one that's kind of a burden is the 3 double pip, and just so that people can learn something outside of the deck tech, this one wants 15 sources of red, and right now you have 18, so you are more than good on that front. So remember that for the turn 1 Land of War Elves, like your Verge lands don't count because they come in on the turn 1 as red sources. So just something to keep in mind. Okay, so that being said, I like the overall approach of the deck. I think that your sideboard is interesting outside. I'm not a huge fan of the bulk ups, personally, but I do like, you got some Graveyard Hate with Scavenging Ooze, you've got the Callous Sellsword if you need to get some additional reach, you've got Pick Your Poison or the kind of artifact and enchantment or creature with flying hate, similar to the Paw Patch formation, but sorcery speed instead of instant, which I think for this deck is fine. You have a second Vaultborn Tyrant if you need to switch over into like getting additional resources. Scytheclaw Raptor if you're coming up against a deck that has a lot of instances, because none of your stuff is at instant speed, so the Scytheclaw Raptor is not hurting you. And then you have Pyroclasm for a sweeper if you're up against like the early aggro or anything like that. So the bulk of this critique is going to be about the card selection that's actually being included in the deck. So first up, 4 copies of Regal Imperiosaur is pretty standard now for the Gruul Dinos build. I definitely think that you could probably get them in here somewhere. Just, a 5/4 body for 3 really helps with the just kind of overwhelming them with early big beef, right? And then obviously it gives all of your dinosaurs the +1/+1. I also have seen 2 to 3 copies of the Trumpeting Carnosaur quite commonly in the archetype, because it gives you the Discover, and you can also use it as instant speed removal. So it's one of your few options of actually running instant speed removal. I'd also consider putting in the 4th copy of the Polani's Hatcher, and I would also include 2 to 4 copies of the Hulking Raptor, but I would be leaning more heavily into ramping with the bringing in 4 copies of the Ixali's Lorekeeper, which is, so you'd have the Land of War Elves, you'd have the Lorekeeper, which is a 1-mana dork for dinosaurs specifically, and then I like the 2 copies of the Intrepid Paleontologist. And what this allows you to do is just like ramp into your big threats really effectively, right? And I think that that's where the Gruul Dinosaur space is the best, is ramping into big beef. So Draconautics Engineer has also seen some exploration in this, and there's actually been a deck that is a amalgamation of the goblins that then uses the Howl Squad Heavy to tap for 1 red for each goblin that you have as a way to ramp as well. So there's like a goblin meets dinos archetype that's being explored right now. Not saying that you should go that direction, but the Draconics Engineer for 1 red can give your Galta haste, right? And then it itself for 3 and a red can exhaust to create a 4/4 flying dinosaur. So it has synergies in the dinosaur, and I think is kind of why you see exploration in that archetype in the first place. And then last but not least, so these last couple of suggestions are just cards to consider. The other one would be Aganosaur Rex, being able to just have the big creature, but also having, it's an 8/8 trample for 5, but you can cycle it to give something indestructible and give it some counters, and that's a way to kind of save some of your big threats. So just something to consider. Been seeing it explored. The cards that I think are weakest in your build, and this is no personal attack or anything, I think that the Paw Patch Banner is a hard sell for me because you're taking a turn off to ramp and then giving you that Lord effect, which I think you would just rather have a 5/4 dinosaur. Depending, I guess, if you lean further into the like 1 mana dorks, which I think are better to go like turn 1 mana dork, turn 2 big beef, right? Hammer Skull, etc. So I'd consider cutting the 4 copies of the Paw Patch Banner. I'm just not a big fan of this card, I'll admit. The other thing too is Hard Hitting Question. We've seen Hard Hitting Question or its counterpart Bushwhack, because your creatures are so big. Some people run the Bushwhack, which is a fight spell instead of a bite spell, but can also go find a land. Either way, I'm not really impressed with it. I think that you should focus on a linear strategy that runs less interaction against your opponent. Outside of the, I'd probably keep the Triumphant Chomps. Even these are on the questionable chopping block for me, right? But I would start with getting rid of the sorcery speed and consider bringing in the Trumpeting Carnosaur so that you have some more instant speed interaction. And then, just move away from the hard-hitting question, leave yourself with maybe the Chomp if you want, right? That'd be my suggestion. So after that, though, the ones that are a little bit more of just considerations instead of ones that I think are like pretty solidly should be removed, is Garruk's Uprising. This is the top of the chopping block for me. It's a similar reasoning to the Paw Patch Banners, that it's just not developing to the board, and so the Garruk's Uprising obviously does give you the creatures entering with trample and drawing a card, so there are synergies since like this doesn't have trample, but I've just found it to be somewhat unimpressive, rather than just like getting a Polani's Hatcher down and swinging in with big hasted creatures already, right? I haven't found the card draw to be necessary. So that being said, I'd also consider cutting the Vaultborn Tyrant. I don't think that it's necessary to do the kind of like play a big creature and draw into another one and gain life. Again, this is a little bit more into personal territory. The Bonehorde Dracosaur also, I think, is a reasonable cut. I think there's other dragons that work well, other dinosaurs that work well, rather than the kind of like mid-range dig. The problem with this is that you need some way to protect it, right? If you're going to play the Bonehorde Dracosaur, it sucks when you get hit by Go for the Throat, right? And if you're playing a really creature-centric strategy like Dinosaurs is, you're going to see your opponent sideboard into single-point interaction and Wraths, right? So I think figuring out a way, figuring out something that's a little bit less susceptible to that Wrath kind of, or single point interaction, is a definite way to approach it. Triumphant Chomp, like I mentioned, I would personally get rid of it and run just a strictly linear ramp into big threats strategy, off of the 1-drops. And then Itzquinth, I don't particularly like it. I think that with the Llanowar Elves giving you green specifically and requiring green, the split cost of the green-red can be really difficult. And then, maybe part of it is that you just like you have the biggest beef around, so you don't really need to be removing your opponent's stuff in the first place. Like if ramping into your Polani's Hatcher and then slamming a Galta with haste doesn't do it, then that's kind of the point of this deck, right? In my opinion. So that would be my suggestion, would be explore some of those changes, see if you like them. Obviously, if you love this deck and you're just showcasing it, then congrats. And I hope my comments find you well. And this one was Esper Ketramose by JMoney9494. And we start off with the lands, as is tradition. And if you count the Balemerc as a 2-drop and Ride's End as a 2-drop as well, so these are over here, then I would be running this at 23 lands in best of 1 and 24 in best of 3. So without the sideboard, I assume this is a best of 1 list, so I think you could also shave a land here. And then you're running 10 tap lands So you've got a fair amount of oh gosh, oh sorry, the Verge land's not tapped. So, but you have Fortress, yeah. So you have 10 tap lands in here to basically play these black cards, right? You're like playing these guys right here for 6 cards. And I don't think that they're necessary to actually really include. I think that you could maybe smooth out your mana base a little bit and not run the Anoint with Affliction. Like this could just be another Not on My Watch, Ride's End, or Ossification. If you're leaning more into just white and blue basics, Ossification also exiles. The point here is you want to try to exile 7 or more cards. I like the idea of using the Abhorrent Oculus to get 6 of them. I think that you should include probably 2 more copies of the Ghost Vacuum since you are using Day of Judgment instead of Sunfall. So if your plan is to just like slowly exile things with the Ghost Vacuum, then yeah, I think we want more than just 2 of them. And similarly, since this is kind of the build around of the deck, and I know this was just a brew, but here's my feedback anyway, right? I would run 4 copies of the Ketramose because it is kind of like the card that you're building around. So consider that. Yeah, so cut out the Overlord of the Baelmerk and Anoint with Affliction. I think you have enough dig to try to find your Ketramose anyway, that you don't need the Overlord of the Baelmerk, and then run Ossifications or additional copies of Not on My Watch and Ride's End, like I mentioned. And just as a side note to this archetype in general, if you are going to go down this path, it has been explored primarily in Abzan with green, kind of taking the Insidious Roots option as a way to get cards whenever 1 or more cards are put into exile from graveyards and or the battlefield. So it works in the Golgari Roots deck. That hasn't worked particularly well. And then the other one is Orsov. I've seen a fair amount exploring it just strictly in black-white because both Kaya and Ashiok both exile or care about exile. And so you can kind of put it into the Super Friends build in Orsov, and it's a pretty nice home there. And so I think it's personal. That's where I've seen it performing the best, is in black-white. So I hope my comments find you well. I hope... Thank you for your submissions. This is, you know, I like the idea of kind of leaning into this Azorius Oculus build, because like you can still cheese out the Abhorrent Oculus or get your Ketramose off of the mill, right? The downside, I think, though, is if you use the Helping Hand on the Abhorrent Oculus, then you're not doing the exile. But then, like, you still have a cheap Abhorrent Oculus, so, like, how can you really be going that wrong, right? And then you've got the Picklock Prankster and the Founding the Third Path, which I really like for filling the graveyard. I don't know if I'm sold on the negates or if these should be Spell Pierces or just, I think, another 2 copies of the Ghost Vacuum. But anyway, let me know how it goes if you do actually make this deck, J-Money, and... yeah, hope my comments find you well. So thank you to those who did submit for the community deck tech. Next week, there will be another community deck tech, so look for it on Tuesday. It'll just look like a little card, and it'll say for week 5 of Aetherdrift if you want my feedback on one of your archetypes or one of your decks. And you could always consider becoming a YouTube member. It's something that I do for YouTube members for free. I just thought I would do one every 2 weeks for the community at large. So... take care, everybody, and I will see you all. Well, I won't see you, but I have on Thursday, I'll have the Mono Blue Flash build, which is kind of a brew. I'm trying to do a weekly brew, and then on Sunday, we'll be back to the Meta Breakers. So take care, and I'll see you then.